Amara Diallo moved through the gleaming, hushed halls of Olympus Medical, a new nurse easily overlooked amidst the crisp white coats and polished seniority. Her gaze, however, found its anchor in room 304, where 12-year-old Javier Morales lay. Javier, barely more than a whisper of a boy, was recovering from aneurysm surgery, a fragile butterfly with a newly mended wing. Dr. Kaito Ishikawa, resident extraordinaire, strode past Amara without a glance, his crisp uniform almost glowing with self-importance. "Nurse Diallo," he'd once snapped, "we don't need intuition here, we need procedure." The sting of his dismissal still lingered. Now, he leaned over Javier, frowning slightly as a new monitor flickered. A flicker of pain crossed Javier's pale face, a soft moan escaping his lips. Amara's eyes, hidden behind their quiet exterior, sharpened. She saw the subtle shift in his skin tone, the shallow flutter of his chest, details that whispered of a storm brewing. Kaito, however, seemed to brush it off as post-op discomfort. But Amara knew better. A primal instinct, honed in places far from Olympus's pristine calm, pulsed within her. They might ignore her now, but when the real crisis hit, and it would, she would not stand by. Javier's life hung by a thread, and only she saw the true knot forming. The pristine calm of Olympus Medical Center, usually a soothing balm, now felt like a suffocating shroud around Amara. The polished floors gleamed, reflecting the sterile white lights, a stark contrast to the escalating chaos unfolding within Javier's room. She watched, a silent sentinel, as the subtle signs she'd noticed earlier began to scream for attention. Javier's breathing, once shallow, now hitched and strained. His pale skin took on an ashen hue, and a cold sweat beaded on his forehead. The gentle flutter of his chest had become a desperate, rapid pant. Dr. Kaito Ishikawa, engrossed in updating Javier's chart on a sleek tablet, initially missed it. Or perhaps, he simply chose to. Amara cleared her throat, her voice, usually so quiet, a small tremor in the cavernous silence of the room. "Dr. Ishikawa," she began, her gaze fixed on Javier. "Javier's vitals, they're shifting. His respiratory rate is elevated, and he's diaphoretic." Kaito, without looking up, waved a dismissive hand. "Postoperative anxiety, Nurse Diallo. Perfectly normal. He's just recovering from a major procedure. Keep an eye on him, but let's not invent emergencies." His tone was a cool, condescending balm that did nothing to soothe Amara's rising alarm. It was the same dismissal she'd faced countless times, the quiet nurse whose observations were always secondary to the resident's pronouncements. A familiar, bitter taste coated her tongue. But Javier wasn't just anxious. His small hand, which had been resting loosely on the sheet, now clenched into a fist. A low, guttural moan escaped his lips, sounding less like discomfort and more like true agony. The bedside monitor, until now displaying a serene green line, spiked erratically. A red alarm light began to flash, an insistent, rhythmic pulse in the quiet room. Beep, beep, beep. Kaito finally looked up, his brow furrowing as he saw the flashing red. "What the—" He strode to the monitor, his previously composed demeanor beginning to fray. His blood pressure is dropping, pulse is racing. "What happened?" He glared at Amara as if she were personally responsible. "He's been deteriorating rapidly in the last few minutes, Doctor," Amara stated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She knew what this meant. She'd seen it before, in far grittier circumstances. The hidden bleed. The silent killer. "I think it's an internal hemorrhage. The abdominal distension is increasing." She gestured subtly towards Javier's midsection, where a slight, unsettling firmness was becoming apparent. Kaito's eyes darted to Javier, then back to the monitor, then to Amara. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, a visible crack appearing in his facade of unflappable control. "Internal hemorrhage," he scoffed, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Impossible. The surgical site was perfectly stable. Get an ultrasound in here, stat. And prep for emergency or we'll have him back on the table." His words were in order, an attempt to reassert control, but they hung in the air, tinged with a desperate edge. Amara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Dr. Ishikawa, she interjected, her voice gaining a quiet urgency that cut through the nascent panic. His vitals are dropping too fast. He won't make it to the OR. He's hypotensive, tachycardic, the bleeding is too rapid, too extensive. We need to do something here. Kaito whirled on her, his face flushed. Do you think you know more than a resident surgeon, Nurse Diallo? We follow protocol. We can't just do something here. This is Olympus, not some back alley clinic. His voice was rising, attracting the attention of other nurses scurrying past in the hallway. Javier, wide-eyed and terrified, whimpered, his small body trembling. He's crashing, Doctor, Amara pressed, ignoring Kaito's personal attack. The image of a young soldier, bleeding out on dusty ground, flashed in her mind. The same speed, the same sudden, devastating collapse. His abdomen is rigid. The blood loss is accelerating. Suddenly, Javier let out a choked cry, his eyes rolling back slightly. The monitor's beeping intensified, a frantic drumbeat to the unfolding disaster. His blood pressure plummeted further, a single-digit number flashing menacingly. His small body began to convulse faintly. Kaito stared, paralyzed for a moment, his face paling. His textbook knowledge was failing him. The elegant, precise procedures he had mastered were too slow, too far away. He barked orders at a junior nurse to page Dr. Vesalius, but his voice lacked conviction, tinged with the dawning realization of his own powerlessness. The crisis was spiraling, and he, the brilliant Dr. Ishikawa, was losing control. Amara, however, felt a different kind of calm settling over her. A quiet, terrifying clarity. The rules of Olympus, the rigid hierarchy, the scorn she endured, none of it mattered now. Only Javier. Only the urgent, desperate need to stop the bleed. She saw the fear in Kaito's eyes, the panic in the room, but her own gaze was fixed on Javier, her mind already racing, sifting through memories of improvised solutions, of lives saved against impossible odds. The elegant world of Olympus was crumbling, revealing the brutal truth beneath. Sometimes, even the most advanced medicine wasn't enough, and only raw ingenuity could save a life. Javier's small body, so recently alive with a child's restless energy, now lay alarmingly still, his shallow breaths barely stirring the thin hospital gown. The monitor, which moments ago had flickered with the reassuring rhythm of a stable heart, now screamed a frantic, accelerating alarm. His blood pressure plummeted with terrifying speed, a digital countdown to catastrophe, while his oxygen saturation dipped into dangerous territory. His lips, once a healthy pink, were now a bluish white, and his skin had taken on the pallor of ash. The room, already tense, became a crucible of mounting horror. Dr. Ishikawa, brilliant as he was trapped in the rigid confines of his training. He barked orders for more blood products, for stronger vasopressors, for a rapid infuser, but each command felt like a desperate plea echoing into a void. His hands, usually so steady and precise, trembled slightly as he fumbled with an four-line, his brow furrowed in a panicked concentration that bordered on paralysis. He was performing by the book, but the book offered no chapter on this kind of lightning-fast, catastrophic collapse. His medical knowledge, his meticulous adherence to protocol, was a dam cracking under an impossible flood. Amara watched, her heart thrumming a frantic counterpoint to the monitors. She saw the familiar signs, the telltale indicators she knew not from sterile operating theaters but from makeshift tents under a hostile sky. She instinctively reached for a larger bore needle, a different kind of fluid, but Kaito, focused on his failing protocols, barely registered her presence. "Nurse, for fluids, now," he snapped, motioning vaguely with a trembling hand, oblivious to the critical nuance she had tried to introduce. Her silent, practiced adjustment was brushed aside, a detail beneath the notice of a resident consumed by a crisis he couldn't grasp. A new voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the rising chaos. "What's happening here, Dr. Ishikawa?" Dr. Elara Vesalius, chief of surgery, strode into the room, her composure a stark contrast to the unfolding disaster, yet her eyes immediately registering the severity. Her gaze swept over Javier, then to Kaito, then to the chaotic vital signs. "The OR is prepping, but at this rate, she didn't need to finish the sentence." The bleed was too fast, too aggressive. Transporting Javier, even the short distance to surgery, was becoming an almost insurmountable risk. Every second was an open wound, bleeding away his life. Internal bleeding, Dr. Vesalius, post-op aneurysm. We're pushing fluids, maintaining pressure. Kaito rattled off the textbook responses, his voice strained, sweat beading on his forehead. He sounded like a student reciting answers he knew by heart, but the questions on the exam were changing too quickly. He wasn't seeing Javier, he was seeing a diagnosis, and his elegant solutions were proving hopelessly inadequate against this brutal, rapid deterioration. This wasn't a standard complication, this was a war-zone injury, a body hemorrhaging from an inaccessible wound, and the rules of engagement were entirely different. Amara's world narrowed. The frantic beeps and alarms faded, replaced by the ghost of distant gunfire, the smell of dust and blood. Javier wasn't a child patient anymore, he was a casualty, fading fast, his lifeblood draining into his own body cavity. The meticulous hierarchy of Olympus, the carefully curated elegance of its procedures, crumbled into irrelevance. She remembered the desperate ingenuity born of necessity, the quick, daring fixes, the unconventional methods that saved lives when time and resources were scarce. Her mind raced through memories of field surgeries, of improvising drains with whatever was at hand, of stopping uncontrolled bleeds with daring, direct interventions. The ore was too slow. There would be no time for elegant incisions or carefully prepped fields. The air grew heavy with unspoken despair. Javier's parents, huddled in the corner, were beyond tears, their faces etched with a silent, primal terror. Their son's small hand twitched feebly, a final, desperate gesture for life. Dr. Vesalius, usually unflappable, watched the monitor with a grim set to her jaw, her gaze betraying a dawning helplessness. Kaito was still barking orders, but his voice was losing its conviction, dissolving into a desperate, hollow sound. The collective fear of the room became a palpable thing, a suffocating shroud. And in that moment, Amara knew. Kaito wouldn't save him. Dr. Vesalius, bound by protocol, couldn't. Only the raw, brutal, unconventional methods she carried within her, buried deep beneath layers of humble anonymity, stood a chance. The elegant world of Olympus was failing, and a different kind of knowledge, honed in the crucible of chaos, was desperately needed. Isn't it heartbreaking to watch someone like Amara, brimming with unrecognized brilliance, struggle against the tide of doubt? We've all felt overlooked, haven't we? This powerful moment, where the world needs a hero no one expects, reminds us of the strength found in unexpected places. If stories like Amara's, celebrating courage and the triumph of the underestimated, resonate deeply, we invite you to become a vital part of our growing global community. Hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep bringing you more captivating, high-quality narratives that champion the human spirit. Join us, and let's uncover these incredible tales together. The air in the room was a thick, suffocating blanket woven from despair and the metallic tang of fear. Javier's heart monitor continued its frantic, weakening protest, each beep a hammer blow against the fragile silence. Dr. Vesalius's gaze, usually an impenetrable mask of surgical calm, now flickered with undisguised panic between the dying child and the useless monitors. Kaito, still barking orders, sounded less like a commander and more like a drowning man grasping at straws. He was losing control, and with it, Javier. Amara felt the raw, brutal knowledge rise within her, a tide that threatened to drown her humility. This wasn't a textbook case, it was a wound, gaping and lethal, and the textbook had no answers. Her hands, calloused not by Olympus's pristine gloves but by a past she had tried to bury, twitched with an instinct honed in chaos. She could no longer be just a nurse, invisible and compliant. Javier was dying, and every second was a betrayal of the oath she'd taken, even if that oath had been uttered in a war-torn tent rather than an operating theater. Dr. Vesalius, Amara's voice cut through Kaito's increasingly shrill commands, soft yet piercing, like a scalpel finding its mark. It wasn't loud, but it possessed an authority that silenced the room, momentarily even Kaito. There's no time for the ore. We need to drain the bleed here. Now. Kaito whirled, his face contorted in a sneer. Are you insane, nurse? Bedside drainage? What utter nonsense! Who do you think you are, proposing such recklessness? This is Olympus, not some back alley clinic. Amara didn't flinch. Her gaze, however, was fixed on Dr. Vesalius, who watched her with a mixture of shock and a nascent, desperate curiosity. The chief of surgery was cornered, her meticulous world crumbling. She'd exhausted every conventional option, and here was a quiet nurse, speaking of the unthinkable with an unnerving calm. Rapid, targeted drainage, Amara continued, her voice low, steady, filled with a conviction that brooked no argument. Less invasive than a full laparotomy. Faster. Less shock to his system. We need to relieve the pressure, Dr. Vesalius. He's going into tamponade. The bleed is acute, but accessible if we are precise. She didn't explain how she knew, didn't offer a peer-reviewed article. She spoke with the authority of someone who had seen this scenario play out too many times, whose hands had wrestled life from the jaws of death in far less sterile environments. Vesalius's eyes narrowed, weighing the audacity of the suggestion against the grim reality of the monitor. Her mind, trained to follow protocols forged over decades of medical advancement, screamed at the barbarity of it. Bedside drainage? Without full surgical prep? Without an anesthesiologist standing by? It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was everything Olympus Medical Center stood against. Yet, in Amara's eyes, she saw not recklessness, but a desperate clarity. She saw not arrogance, but an unwavering certainty that resonated with the primal instinct to save a life. Kaito was floundering, but Amara was not. Amara offered a sliver of hope, however thin and jagged. Javier's parents, sensing a shift, leaned forward, their faces etched with a fragile, dawning hope. Their silent plea was a tangible weight in the room. Dr. Vesalius, this is medical malpractice. Kaito blustered, stepping between them. You cannot possibly consider this. She's a nurse. What experience could she possibly have with such a critical surgical procedure? What experience do we have with him surviving if we wait another minute, Dr. Ishikawa? Amara countered, her voice sharp now, but still measured. It was less a question, more a statement of inescapable fact. The room held its breath, waiting. Vesalius looked at Javier, his small chest barely rising, his lips tinged blue. She looked at his parents, their eyes wide with terror. And then, she looked at Amara, at the quiet strength in her posture, the unwavering focus in her eyes, the complete absence of panic. Amara wasn't just suggesting a procedure, she was offering herself, her courage, her mysterious expertise, as a final gamble. Vesalius knew, deep in her gut, that this was a monumental breach of every rule she lived by. It could ruin her career, devastate the hospital's reputation. But Kaito had failed. Her own methods were failing. And a child was dying. Nurse Diallo, Vesalius said, her voice surprisingly steady, though a tremor ran through her hand as she instinctively gripped the bed rail. What do you need? The words hung in the air, a bell tolling the end of one era and the beginning of another. Kaito gasped, a sound of outraged disbelief, but Amara only nodded, a flicker of profound relief easing the tension in her shoulders. Her transformation was complete. The humble nurse had vanished, replaced by the ghost of a combat medic, sharp, decisive, utterly focused. A large bore needle or trocars, a suction device, local anesthetic, and sterile drapes. Dr. Ishikawa, assist me. Now. Her voice was a command, not a request, and though Kaito spluttered, a primal instinct for survival, for action, seemed to override his ego. He hesitated, but then, under the sheer force of Amara's presence and Vesalius's silent, steely gaze, he moved. Amara turned, already scanning the equipment cart, her mind mapping out the next crucial seconds. Fear still simmered beneath her calm, the very real terror of failure, of losing a child. But overriding it was a fierce, protective resolve, a well of courage she had thought she'd sealed off long ago. This wasn't just about Javier, it was about honoring the unseen fallen, about reclaiming a part of herself she'd sacrificed for peace. She pulled a drape from the cart, her movements fluid and purposeful. The rigid hierarchy of Olympus had cracked, and through the fissure, a new kind of trust, born of desperation and courage, was beginning to emerge. Vesalius watched, her own heart pounding, a silent prayer forming on her lips as Amara prepared to break every rule to save a life. Amara didn't wait. Her hands, calloused and quick, moved with a devastating economy of motion. She snagged a sterile drape, unfolding it with a snap that echoed in the suddenly silent room. Dr. Ishikawa, her voice was low, taut with command, cutting through the haze of panic, prepare the large-bore catheter and suction. Quickly. Kaito, still reeling from the unexpected turn, found himself obeying. His hands, usually so confident, fumbled with the packaging, his mind struggling to reconcile the structured world of Olympus with Amara's raw, battlefield efficiency. He had expected her to hesitate, to second-guess, to ask for guidance. Instead, she was dictating orders, her eyes never leaving Javier, her gaze a laser-focused beam. Vesalius watched, transfixed. She'd seen surgeons operate under pressure, but Amara's presence was different. There was no theatrical flair, no bravado, just an unnerving calm, a quiet ferocity that demanded obedience. Amara grabbed the portable ultrasound, her fingers dancing across the controls, finding the elusive pocket of hemorrhage with a speed that made Vesalius's own experienced eye widen. There, Amara murmured, a single word that vibrated with grim certainty. Dr. Ishikawa, mark this point. N. I'll need a wide-bore trocar. Sterile. Kaito stared at the image, then at Amara. A wide-bore trocar? For a drainage? This wasn't standard. This was aggressive. Reckless, even. Nurse Diallo, are you certain? A smaller gauge might be safer, less invasive. Safer for what, doctor? His pulse is weakening. Amara cut him off, her voice sharper now, a whip crack in the sterile air. Less invasive will be too slow. We need volume out, now. If you are unable to assist, step aside. The rebuke was brutal, public, and utterly effective. Kaito's face flushed, but the fire in Amara's eyes brooked no argument. He swallowed, a knot forming in his throat, and grabbed the requested instrument. The sheer audacity of her plan, the stark departure from everything he'd been taught, was staggering. Yet, the rapid deterioration of Javier's vitals, stark on the monitor, screamed louder than any protocol. Amara draped Javier, exposing only the precise area. Her movements were ritualistic, ingrained. She painted the skin with antiseptic, her touch surprisingly gentle on the boy's pale flesh. Then, without a moment's hesitation, her hand reached for the scalpel Kaito held out. Her grip was firm, her eyes unblinking. There was a faint glint of steel, a fleeting impression of a deft, almost violent precision. A collective gasp, soft and involuntary, rippled through the small group of onlookers who had gathered, drawn by the escalating tension. Dr. Vesalius, usually the epitome of composure, felt a jolt run through her. Amara hadn't asked. She hadn't hesitated. She had simply acted. The sound of the incision, a soft, sickening whisper, seemed unnaturally loud in the profound silence that followed. Kaito watched, paralyzed, as Amara's fingers, steady as rock, explored the subcutaneous tissue. His own hands felt useless, clammy. He had always been taught a surgeon's touch, delicate, deliberate. Amara's was primal. Focused. She knew exactly what she was searching for, and her movements were guided by an instinct he couldn't comprehend. Suction, Dr. Ishikawa, Amara commanded, her voice still quiet, but imbued with an authority that left no room for dissent. Prepare to clear the path. I'm going deep. Kaito, barely registering the words, brought the suction tip closer. He could feel the tremor in his own hand, contrasting sharply with Amara's unwavering focus. He saw her grip the trocar, positioning it with an anatomical understanding that was breathtakingly precise. She didn't look at the screen, she felt the landmarks, guiding the instrument with an almost terrifying confidence. Vesalius, who knew every millimeter of human anatomy, recognized the sheer skill in Amara's intuitive navigation. It was as if Amara could see beneath the skin, bypassing the need for imaging, relying on an internal map burned into her memory. The air hung heavy, thick with unspoken fears and dawning awe. Every breath seemed held, every gaze locked on Amara's face, etched with fierce concentration. The silence was broken only by the soft hiss of the oxygen, the rhythmic beep of the monitor, and the almost imperceptible sounds of Amara's precise, unconventional work. A bead of sweat traced a path down Vesalius's temple, a silent testament to the raw, visceral tension filling the room. This wasn't surgery as she knew it. This was an emergency intervention on the precipice of death, performed by someone who understood the precipice far better than any of them. Amara's fingers, stained with a faint trace of blood that seemed to mock the sterility of the room, made one final, almost imperceptible adjustment. A tiny, decisive turn of the drainage catheter. It wasn't forceful, not hurried, but imbued with an absolute certainty that resonated through the hushed room. For a split second, nothing changed. The monitor continued its frantic beeping. Javier's ashen face remained still, his chest barely rising. Then, a gasp, small, collective, almost soundless, rippled through the medical team. The chaotic dance of lines on the cardiac monitor began to smooth. The frantic, erratic spike softened, finding a rhythm, tentative at first, then steadier. The insistent, demanding alarms that had screamed their desperation just moments ago began to quiet, their shrill urgency fading into a more measured, reassuring pulse. It wasn't a dramatic Hollywood flatline-to-life jolt, but a subtle, yet profound, transformation. The oxygen saturation numbers, stubbornly clinging to the perilous edge, began a slow, hesitant climb. Each decimal point felt like a hard-won victory, a tiny flag planted on the treacherous ascent back from the brink. Dr. Ishikawa, who had been rigidly standing, poised to intervene or protest, felt an involuntary tremor run through him. His jaw, clenched so tight it ached, finally relaxed, almost imperceptibly. The incredulity that had been etched into his features slowly morphed into something akin to stupefaction. He looked at the monitor, then at Amara, then back at the monitor, as if trying to reconcile the impossible reality unfolding before his eyes. He had been ready for failure, for the grim pronouncement. Instead, he was witnessing a miracle, born of audacity and an unfamiliar, undeniable genius. A tool, held forgotten in his hand, clattered softly to the floor, the sound surprisingly loud in the newfound quiet. Dr. Vesalius, however, didn't flinch. Her gaze, which had been fixed on Amara's every move, softened around the edges, the intense clinical scrutiny giving way to an emotion she rarely displayed, wonder. A single tear, unbidden, welled in the corner of her eye, a testament to the sheer, unadulterated relief that washed over her. It wasn't just Javier's life she was seeing being pulled back, it was the redefinition of what was possible, the shattering of the rigid boxes she, and all of them, had built around their understanding of medicine. She took a slow, deep breath, feeling the tension that had tightened her chest for what felt like an eternity finally dissipate, leaving a profound, almost dizzying lightness. Amara, still holding the catheter, didn't look up immediately. Her breathing, which had been shallow and controlled, deepened into a slow, measured rhythm. The fierce concentration that had hardened her features softened, revealing a subtle tremor in her hands, a delayed reaction to the immense pressure she had just endured. Her shoulders, which had been hunched with the weight of Javier's life, visibly relaxed. She closed her eyes for a fleeting second, a silent, internal acknowledgement of a battle fought and won. When she opened them, they held a quiet, almost weary triumph, devoid of arrogance, simply the profound satisfaction of a life saved. Across the room, the silent chorus of nurses and support staff collectively exhaled. Shoulders sagged, faces, previously strained with dread, now bloomed with a fragile hope. A quiet murmur of relief swept through the room, like a gentle breeze rustling through dry leaves. It wasn't boisterous, not yet. It was the soft, fragile sound of people daring to believe in salvation after staring into the abyss. The air, which had been thick and suffocating with impending loss, now felt lighter, breathable, imbued with the faint, sweet scent of victory. Javier, still pale, still fragile, but now undeniably there, was breathing more easily. The rhythmic rise and fall of his small chest was no longer a desperate struggle, but a steady, hopeful beat. Vesalius finally moved, stepping closer to Amara, her voice a low, husky whisper, thick with emotion. Amara, she said, the name sounding foreign on her tongue, imbued with a respect that transcended their usual hierarchical exchange. You saved him. It was a statement of fact, a confession, and an unspoken apology, all rolled into one. Kaito, stumbling forward, eyes still wide with shock and a dawning understanding, could only stammer, but how? I've never seen anything like it. His arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a stark, vulnerable humility. He looked at Amara not as a subordinate, but as an enigma, a master of a forgotten art. Amara finally withdrew the catheter, her movements still precise, but now infused with an almost ceremonial grace. He was bleeding too fast, doctor, she said, her voice steady, though tinged with fatigue. Conventional surgery would have taken too long. The internal pressure, it was creating a tamponade, occluding the bleed point. I just opened a path for it, relieved the pressure, and gave the natural clotting factors a chance. She didn't elaborate on how she knew where to open that path, or with such impossible speed and certainty. That was her secret, for now. The room, once a battleground of despair, now pulsed with a quiet, palpable triumph. It wasn't just Javier who had been saved, something fundamental within Olympus Medical had been rescued from its own rigid limitations. The rigid hierarchy, for a fleeting moment, had shattered. The humble nurse had become the undisputed hero, the one who had seen beyond the protocols, beyond the screens, and into the raw, desperate heart of life itself. Amara looked down at Javier, a soft, maternal smile gracing her lips. He was still in danger, still had a long road ahead, but he was alive. And in that moment, for Amara, for Vesalius, for even Kaito, that was everything. The quiet, profound relief was a cleansing wave, washing away the fear and doubt, leaving behind only gratitude and an undeniable, awe-filled respect for the nurse who refused to let a child die. The air in the room, once thick with the metallic tang of fear and blood, now shimmered with an almost sacred silence. The rhythmic beep-beep-beep of the monitor, steady and reassuring, was the only sound for long moments. Javier, miraculously, was stable. The bleed was stemmed. Life, so precariously balanced, had been pulled back from the precipice by the most unlikely of hands. Dr. Kaito Ishikawa was the first to stir, though his movement was a slow, almost painful unwinding. His eyes, usually sharp with ambition and a touch of condescension, were wide, unfocused, staring first at Javier's now calm chest, then, slowly, at Amara. The arrogance that usually sat like a crown upon his brow had vanished, replaced by a raw, unvarnished astonishment. He had watched her move with a precision he hadn't believed possible, an intuitive grace under pressure that defied every textbook he'd ever memorized. He saw the faint smear of blood on her cheek, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, and for the first time, he saw not just Nurse Diallo, but a force of nature. His mouth opened, then closed, a silent, I don't understand, hanging unspoken in the charged space. Dr. Elara Vesalius, chief of surgery, however, was already moving, her relief palpable, but quickly morphing into professional, yet deeply personal, inquiry. She stepped closer to Amara, her gaze piercing, though softened now by a profound gratitude. Nurse Diallo, she began, her voice steady, but with an underlying tremor of awe. What you did, it was extraordinary. Unorthodox. Dangerous. And you saved his life. She paused, then pressed, but how? How did you possess such specific, immediate knowledge? The speed, the certainty, it goes far beyond standard nursing protocols. Even surgical residents wouldn't be so audacious, let alone so precise without imaging or a clear surgical field. Amara met her gaze, her own eyes tired but clear. She glanced at Javier, a soft, maternal concern still lingering. He needed it, Dr. Vesalius, she said simply, her voice low, professional. Every second counted. The standard approach would have been too late. She didn't elaborate, didn't seek praise. Her focus remained on the patient, the critical needs of the moment still paramount in her mind. But Vesalius wasn't satisfied with the humble deflection. Nurse Diallo, she insisted, her tone firm, though not accusatory. I just witnessed a procedure that most surgeons in this country wouldn't dare attempt without full or support. You used Ishikawa as an instrument, you navigated blindly, and you did it under impossible pressure. You saved a child I was losing. I need to understand who I just gave permission to." Amara took a deep, steadying breath. It was a moment she had quietly dreaded, a part of her past she rarely spoke of, especially in the pristine, controlled environment of Olympus Medical. She knew this reveal would shatter perceptions, perhaps even raise questions about her current role, but Javier's life had made it unavoidable. Her gaze drifted, briefly, to a point beyond the sterile walls, her mind replaying distant, starker scenes. "I wasn't always just a nurse, Dr. Vesalius," Amara began, her voice gaining a quiet strength, a resonance that hadn't been there before. "Before I came to Olympus, before these hospitals, I served." She paused, allowing the weight of the word to settle. "I was a combat medic. Front lines. For years." The words hung in the air, a sudden, shocking revelation. Kaito gasped, a small, involuntary sound. Vesalius's expression shifted, surprise giving way to a dawning comprehension, then profound respect. The pieces clicked into place, Amara's unshakable calm under pressure, her intuitive understanding of the body's breaking point, her ability to make split-second, life-or-death decisions when chaos reigned supreme. Not in these quiet, sterile corridors, but in places where protocols were often just suggestions, and ingenuity was the only equipment you had, Amara continued, her eyes now distant, seeing beyond the room. Where every second wasn't just counted, it was the difference between a pulse and silence. Battlefield trauma. Massive fluid loss. Improvised field surgeries. You learn to see things differently. You learn to listen to the body's raw, desperate plea for life, and you find a way. Anyway. Her revelation wasn't a boast, it was a statement of fact, an explanation of the crucible that had forged her unique expertise. It wasn't about showing off her qualifications, it was about revealing the very fabric of who she was, a person shaped by the most intense forms of human suffering and the fierce, unyielding drive to preserve life against all odds. This wasn't just a resume bullet point, it was the story of her soul. Vesalius looked at Amara with new eyes, seeing not just a skilled nurse, but a warrior of healing, someone who had carried immense responsibility and witnessed unspeakable horrors, yet retained a profound humility and compassion. Kaito, too, stood humbled, his own professional insecurities momentarily forgotten in the face of such quiet, undeniable heroism. He had scoffed at her, dismissed her, and she had literally saved a life he was losing, drawing on a well of experience he couldn't even fathom. The air in the room, once charged with relief, now hummed with a nascent respect, a recognition of a hidden depth that had just saved Javier, and perhaps, profoundly changed Olympus Medical forever. The silence that followed Amara's revelation wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was a profound resetting of the entire professional landscape within Olympus Medical. The air, once thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the tension of a near loss, now carried the quiet hum of new beginnings. Javier Morales, stable and recovering, became a living testament not just to medical prowess, but to the power of human intuition, courage, and the unwritten lessons learned far beyond the pristine walls of elite institutions. For Amara, the change was instantaneous and deeply personal. The dismissive glances, the subtle patronization, the feeling of being a cog in a machine that didn't fully see her, all of it melted away. When Dr. Vesalius spoke to her now, it was with an unfamiliar deference that bypassed titles, seeking out the wisdom that had saved a life. When Kaito, usually preening, approached her later that week, his shoulders were visibly slumped, not in defeat, but in a newfound openness. He didn't apologize with words, but with an earnest request to shadow her during rounds, to understand the other perspective. It was a staggering admission from a man whose ego had, until recently, been impenetrable. He started asking her questions, not about protocols she already knew, but about why she saw things differently, how she anticipated complications, a nascent student seeking a teacher he'd once scorned. This wasn't just professional acknowledgement, it was a profound step in Kaito's personal growth, forcing him to confront the limitations of his rigid worldview and embrace the messy, unpredictable reality of true medical practice. Dr. Vesalius's transformation was more systemic, yet equally significant. The initial shock gave way to deep introspection. She realized her adherence to protocol, while vital, had created blind spots, breeding a culture where invaluable perspectives from lower ranks could be stifled. The day after Javier's crisis, Vesalius called Amara into her office, not for a reprimand, but for an extended conversation. She spoke of her own journey, her belief in meritocracy, and how she had inadvertently allowed hierarchy to overshadow true merit. She didn't just commend Amara, she initiated a dialogue about how to integrate such outside-the-box thinking, born from diverse experiences, into Olympus's standard operating procedures. This wasn't about special treatment for Amara, it was about evolving the very fabric of the hospital's approach to healthcare, fostering an environment where practical expertise was valued as highly as academic credentials. Vesalius, once a formidable gatekeeper, began to transform into a bridge builder, eager to dismantle the invisible walls that separated different medical roles. Amara, for her part, found an unexpected peace. Her hidden knowledge, once a source of quiet burden and a barrier between her past and present, was now openly embraced. It wasn't just a skill set, it was her story, a testament to her resilience. The trauma of the battlefield didn't vanish, but its context changed. Instead of being a specter, it became a foundation upon which to build new, vital bridges of knowledge and care. She no longer felt like a ghost haunting the sterile corridors of Olympus, but a vital, vibrant presence. The humble nurse found her authentic voice, speaking with a quiet authority that resonated not from rank, but from undeniable experience. Javier, vibrant and fully recovered, would never know the full extent of the drama he had instigated, but his future was secured by it. His story became a quiet legend in the halls, a whispered reminder of the day when rigid rules bent for ingenuity. The consequences rippled outwards. Within weeks, the dynamic shifted palpably. Nurses were encouraged to voice concerns and insights, and doctors, including many who had once shared Kaito's dismissive attitude, began to listen with genuine curiosity. The concept of interdisciplinary collaboration took on new meaning, not as a buzzword, but as a lived reality. Amara, no longer just a nurse, became a de facto consultant, her unique perspective sought out for complex cases, her quiet wisdom invaluable. She began to train others, sharing not just techniques, but the mindset of a combat medic, the ability to improvise, to assess under extreme pressure, to see beyond the textbook. This wasn't just about saving one boy, it was about saving the soul of a hospital, reminding everyone that true healing comes not just from advanced technology and rigid protocols, but from the unwavering compassion, diverse experiences, and quiet heroism of individuals willing to look beyond their titles and embrace the full spectrum of human potential. Amara had found her place, not by conforming, but by being authentically herself, and in doing so, she opened the door for everyone at Olympus Medical to rediscover the profound, transformative power of growth, humility, and hope. Amara's journey reminds us that true heroism often lies not in titles, but in the courage to challenge the norm, to embrace diverse experiences, and to find hope even in the direst moments. What part of Amara's story resonated most deeply with you? We invite you to join our growing global community by subscribing. Your support helps us craft more inspiring tales that celebrate human potential and connection across the world. Thank you for watching, for being part of our journey, and for helping us build a space where every voice is valued. Together, we can create more moments of shared inspiration.